To react to breaking news, we're following four huge breaking news stories. James Comey is starting to enact his own revenge on President Trump for firing him. We'll have more later tonight, but first, it's time for tonight's very important opening monologue. All right, we start tonight with the Trump-hating Washington Post. Now, last night, they released a story saying that President Trump gave the Russian foreign minister and ambassador classified information while they were visiting the White House last week. Now, this story has been denied by Trump administration officials who were actually in the room. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said it was bogus. He said, quote, "I was in the room. It didn't happen." And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, he denied the report, but that does not stop the Destroy Trump media from running wild with all of this. Watch this biased, abusively biased, so-called news. It's really fake news coverage. Watch this.
The White House reeling from another Russia crisis, an unforced error at the hands of President Trump.
The damage to U.S. intelligence interests is being viewed as incalculable this morning.
After this story broke here last night, we heard yelling behind closed doors here in this West Wing. Robin, this is a White House in chaos right now.
If true, this could be the most significant and dangerous mistake of the Trump presidency.
Hyperventilating breathlessness. We're going to have more on the Destroy Trump media's bias covered later in our news segment. It's called the Fake News Roundup. You don't want to miss it. But let's talk about the Washington Post for a minute. This is the same newspaper who has on their homepage the slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." And just last week, remember, the Post reported the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, he was threatening to quit because of Comey's firing. Well, guess what? Rosenstein, and they cited anonymous sources, well, he spoke in an on-camera interview and he said, "I'm not quitting. I never threatened to quit." But that wasn't the only story the Washington Post got wrong last week. After Comey was fired, the Post reported this headline, quote, "Comey sought more resources for Russian probe just days before he was fired by President Trump," officials say. Well, guess what? Wrong again, because the acting FBI director, Andrew McCabe, when testifying before Congress last week, said he was unaware of such request. And that he also went on to say, "We have plenty of money for this. We have adequate funding." So let's put the latest Washington Post fake news story into context. You got two stories they published last week dead wrong. Anonymous sources. They're losing a ton of credibility. And that fits into a much broader narrative that we have been dealing with almost exclusively here in the media on this show. The media is now so corrupt that their anger towards the president is now stopping them from doing their jobs. It's why I have spoken about changing the White House and how they handle the press. I've said they need to restructure daily briefings. Now, the Destroy Trump media, well, they turned them into nothing more than a dog and pony show. I explained this last night. The White House press team, they should develop a list of the top 15, 20 issues of the day, let members of the mainstream media submit questions about them beforehand and afterwards, and they can have all their questions answered in detail and then ask questions from there. Also tonight, another massive breaking news story. Explosive developments in the mysterious murder of former DNC staffer Seth Rich that could completely shatter the narrative that, in fact, WikiLeaks was working with the Russians, or there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Now, if true, this could become one of the biggest scandals in American history and could mean that Rich could have been murdered under very suspicious circumstances. Now, according to former homicide detective Rod Wheeler, who's been hired by the Rich family to investigate the killing, newly discovered evidence shows that the 27-year-old former DNC employee was, in fact, communicating with WikiLeaks before he was gunned down in Washington, D.C. That was back in July of 2016, July 10th, while he was walking home. Seth Rich, shot in the back, left for dead. Police have been saying and characterizing this as an attempted robbery gone wrong. Here's a problem, and that's an odd explanation because, well, the assailant didn't take anything from Rich. They didn't take his phone, his wallet, his watch, his necklace. They were still on his person at the scene of the crime. And now, while there are several key questions about why Rich was killed, well, here's what we do know. 12 days, exactly 12 days after Rich died and was killed, WikiLeaks published the leaked emails from the DNC. And after Rich's death, WikiLeaks offered a $20,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of the person or the people responsible for the murder. And then back in August, during an interview on Dutch TV, Assange implied that, in fact, Seth Rich was his source. Take a look at this.
Whistleblowers go to significant efforts to get us material and often very significant risks. As a 27-year-old works for the DNC, who was shot in the back, murdered just 2 weeks ago for unknown reasons as he was walking down the street in Washington. So
that was just a robbery, I believe, wasn't it?
No, there's no finding. So
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that our sources take risks, and they become concerned to see things occurring like that.
But was he one of your sources then? I mean,
we don't comment on who our sources are.
But why make the suggestion about a young guy being shot in the streets of Washington?
Because we have to understand how high the stakes are in the United States.
That's pretty profound. Now, this new information is also consistent with what Julian Assange told me back in January when I asked him specifically, did Russia give him any of these emails? Now, keep in context here, in all the years WikiLeaks, 11 years, they've never been proven wrong. Watch this. Did Russia give you this information or anybody associated with Russia?
Our source is not a state party. So the answer for our interactions is no.
Now, during that same interview, I also asked Julian Assange about a report saying that a disgruntled Democrat, and not the Russians, gave John Podesta's emails to WikiLeaks. Take a look at this. There was one report in the Daily Mail that suggested somebody that you are friendly with actually was handed the documents at American University in a wooded area by a disgruntled Democrat who felt betrayed because the revelation showed that Bernie Sanders had been betrayed, and they didn't like the corruption of the Clinton Foundation. Can you confirm or deny that? Is that story true?
Well, that statement came from Craig Murray. He
friend of yours?
Friend of mine. He's been here several times. But WikiLeaks is a source protection organization. We are famous for never having exposed one of our sources over 10 years. That's why sources trust us and they come to us. So I can't comment on other people's statements about our sources, except to say what we have said, which is that our sources are not a state party.
And the mystery deepens. Now, let me connect the dots from here. Now, from my perspective, this could be a very huge bombshell story. If this is true, and Seth Rich gave WikiLeaks these DNC emails, which ultimately led to the firing, remember Debbie Wasserman Schultz on the eve of the DNC convention? This blows the whole Russia collusion narrative completely out of the water. Now, maybe Seth Rich was upset that the DNC was conspiring to hurt Bernie Sanders and help Hillary Clinton win the nomination. Now, we learned from those released emails, remember this, that was the case. And then finally tonight, 5 powerful forces. I want you to understand exactly what's happening here, because the intensity, the fervor to get this president has been more fierce than ever. You have 5 forces aligning against President Trump. You've got the Destroy Trump propaganda media, the Destroy Trump Democrats, the Washington deep state establishment, meaning some in the intelligence community. You got weak established Republicans, never Trumpers. They now seem to be working together in an unprecedented attack against the sitting president. Now, let's start with the Destroy Trump propaganda media. Now, they have been working around the clock since November. Oh, that's right. They were colluding with Hillary before the election. But since then, to smear, slander, besmirch, character assassination against the president, any means necessary. And they have been against President Trump from the beginning. Remember, it was a funeral for most of these people on television on the night of November 8th. On top of that, you may remember this.
Donald Trump has been saying that he will run for president as a Republican, which is surprising since I just assumed he was running as a joke.
We better be ready for the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket.
Next, I know you don't believe that, but I want to go on to Matthew Dowd.
Sorry to laugh. Which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Of the declared ones, right now, Donald Trump.
Oh, they were laughing then. I don't know if they're laughing now. Now they're in intense take Trump down mode. But then you got the tin foil hat conspiracy theories about President Trump colluding with the Russians, despite up to this point, no evidence that these liberal crackpots they've been pushing forever. Where's the evidence? Now, the media's become completely unhinged. They're suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. And as we have been continually pointing out right here on the show, the truth does not matter to people that call themselves journalists. They are agenda-driven. They're radical left-wing ideologues who are more than happy to push and advance Democratic talking points and political conspiracies. Now, what do we know to be true is what, in this case, WikiLeaks did expose. Remember the countless members of the destroyed Trump media? They were caught colluding with the Clinton campaign. Their main objective, they wanted to get Hillary elected, which explains why they have been perfectly willing to say anything, do anything, regardless of how insane, conspiratorial it may sound, all in an attempt to damage the president. Now, number two, you got this alliance. You got sore loser Democrats. They're still in total and complete denial. They can't believe that Donald Trump won and Hillary lost, that Donald Trump's the president. Now, they've also made it very clear that they're going to obstruct every single agenda item of the president at every single turn. For example, look at the firing of James Comey. Democrats, they hated the guy's guts. They were calling for his head for months, and they even blamed Comey for Hillary Clinton's election loss. Then President Trump's, he fires the former FBI director. All of a sudden, Democrats change their tune, feigning moral outrage, which exposed them to be nothing more than a bunch of partisan hypocrites. And you've got the third alliance. You got the deep state in Washington targeting the president selectively, now on a daily basis, as you saw earlier tonight and last night, leaking information. We told you at the top about the bogus fake news story from completely unreliable Washington Post that they were wrong all those times last week. Last night it was claiming that President Trump allegedly leaked information to the Russians. They didn't care when Hillary did it. Now, to me, it's clear what the motive is here. Some people inside Washington, D.C., the deep state, they are selectively leaking information to try and damage the president. You may remember back in January, the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, remember he issued this warning to the president-elect about the capabilities if he takes on the NSA, the deep state, the intelligence community. This is what he said.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
6 ways in Sunday. The deep state will get you one way or the other. Is that what James Comey was doing tonight, seeking revenge? And by the way, since that warning, we've seen unprecedented leaks, including to the New York Times tonight. We have transcripts of the president's calls with foreign leaders. They've been given to the press. Where did they come from? Drafts of executive orders shared with the media. Information meant to damage the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. That was handed out. And then after Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was caught up in incidental surveillance, he was then unmasked. And then, in violation of the Espionage Act, that classified information was also released to the press. A felony, in case you're interested. Number 4 in this alliance, the establishment Republicans. So many of these people, so weak, so timid, they're spineless, they're feckless, they have no vision. They never supported the president, their own candidate during the campaign. Now, the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, he came out last night and called the report bogus, in spite of all of these people. Finally, number 5, we have never-Trumpers. They revitalized so-called Republicans. They didn't like President Trump during the election, and now they seem to want him to fail so they can say to themselves, they're right. They're so desperate to become relevant again. So it's time to call out this alliance, these 5 groups, for what they are and what is actually happening here. All right, when we come back on this busy breaking news night, James Comey strikes back against President Trump after he was fired last week. Jay Sekulow, Dave Bossie, they'll weigh in, and also tonight.
Donald Trump just gave somebody up out there who will end up dead. And that's not hyperbole, by the way.
The destroyed Trump media is going to town with the Washington Post story, and tonight the New York Times story. We're going to explain the hypocrisy. We have a new segment on the program, our Fake News Roundup segment. We'll get reaction from Joe Concha, Rick Grinnell, and later tonight, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. He's here on this busy, nonstop breaking news, well, against the propaganda media night. As we can. Welcome back to Hannity as we continue with more of the murder of DNC staffer Seth Rich, the complete media hysteria meltdown, and the alliance to destroy President Trump. Joining us now with reaction, he is the chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow, and former deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump. He's also for the president of Citizens United, Fox News contributor David Bossie. Guys, good to see you both. All right, Jay, let's start with the Seth Rich issue, Jay, and the timeline here. And, you know, WikiLeaks, say what you will about Julian Assange, he hasn't been wrong in 11 years. Nobody's proven him wrong. He's been defiant. It's not Russia, not Russia. He defended this guy, as we just played in the last segment, on Dutch TV. And then you look at the timeline, and then you look at earlier reports. Is it possible that this whole Russia narrative was, and the leaks really came from a DNC staffer, and that the media has been wrong for almost a year?
Well, Sean, the media has not been right yet. So the presumption should be that the media is wrong with where they're laying the blame on the leaks that are going on now. So I think the fact is that when you look at evidence, and this is a timeline, as you mentioned, that is troubling to say the least. And I think it raises a serious issue and a serious concern that our national security is being jeopardized in ways we don't fully understand. But I think the media narratives on this and trying to blame the president for all this is proving to be false every single moment of every single day.
Dave Bossie, what's your reaction to all of it?
Well, look, Sean, you're exactly right. The media is out to get this president. They are playing gotcha politics every single day in and day out. The people in the room over this last leak, the people in the room have said that the president did everything by the book, that none of the information was about sources and methods, and that they share information all the time. Look, this is continuous, the permanent campaign against President Trump by the Democrats and by the media.
Yeah. All right, Jay, let me give you an example. So if we look about the sabotage of a president, so the Washington Post breaks this big story. Oh, my God, Donald Trump. Wouldn't he, as president, first of all, have, as commander-in-chief, the ability to share whatever he thought was necessary, in spite of the fact, as Dave is pointing out, okay, everybody in the room says no. And then you go to their sources. And what do we find once again? Their sources are questionable, just like they were last week when they got they got two issues wrong, that Rod Rosenstein threatened to quit. Rod Rosenstein said in an interview with a D.C. station, no, he didn't threaten to quit. You know, according to current and U.S. officials. Okay, who are the former officials that if they weren't in the room, what information do they have? Or the issue of, well, Comey quit just before he asked for more money for the investigation into Russia, and that was denied by Andrew McCabe.
Sure. Well, first of all, the president has the constitutional rights, the commander-in-chief. So he could, assuming for the purpose of argument that the president discussed security information of a significant nature with the Russians, guess what? No crime. He has the constitutional authority to do it. The Supreme Court has said so in the Department of the Navy versus Egan in 1988, an opinion by not a conservative member of the court there, an opinion by Justice Blackmun. That's number one. Number two, reports have been indicating all day that, in fact, this information came from possibly Israeli sources, who, by the way, do intelligence sharing with guess who? The Russians. So we're acting as if discussions about issues of, in this case, civilian aviation are somehow to be not discussed with Russia or the Israelis? That's absurd. So, again, if they write this headline to create a fabricated story and everybody in the room denies its truthfulness. But at the end of the day, even if it was true, which it's not, it would be, so what? The president has this authority.
So last night, Jay, all right, I agree. But last night, the media goes hysterical. They're breathless. They're reporting. Yes. And, you know, earlier tonight, I see the same thing unfolding. Hyperventilating. Yeah. Then I see the New York Times today. I hope you can let this go, meaning the investigation or to end the Flynn investigation that the president said to James Comey. And James Comey's bitter. James Comey got fired. James Comey maybe wrote a memo, maybe he didn't. But is it wrong for the president to say the words, I hope you can let this go? Is there anything illegal about that? Or
no, that's not intervening. No. That's not intervening in the investigation. So, look, James Comey's credibility, let's, first of all, let's talk. I don't care what memo James Comey wrote. At this point, is there anyone that's watching this or in anywhere that can believe anything that James Comey is saying about any of these matters? I mean, really, not a credible witness.
Dave?
No, he's exactly right. James Comey lost his credibility long ago, and it had to do with Hillary Clinton. Let's not forget that the Democrats were hyperventilating about James Comey themselves, in July and in October before the election, and they all wanted him fired then. And then, of course, the president fires him. And the president knows that it is going to make things worse for him by doing the right thing for the American people.
Right.
That's important here. Lester Holt lied last week when he said, the president said he didn't care. Well, of course, he continued to say, I don't care that it is going to make it worse for me when the American people need this man fired, need new leadership at the Bureau. And the president put that first ahead of himself.
It's funny.
And, of course, Lester Holt turned that around.
Well said. All right, guys, good to see you both. When we come back,
Thanks,
former
Sean.
D.C. homicide detective Rod Wheeler investigating the death of DNC staffer Seth Rich, who was killed last July. According to Wheeler, there is now evidence that confirms Seth was, in fact, speaking with WikiLeaks. Wheeler joins us next in an exclusive and also tonight.
If true, this could be the most significant and dangerous mistake of the Trump presidency.
Here we go again. Destroy Trump media. They cannot get enough of the Washington Post. Now the New York Times story about the president in a Post case sharing information with Russia. And did he say, I hope this investigation ends? Well, anyway, the Post newsroom reportedly erupted in applause as the story broke. Aren't they supposed to be unbiased journalists? That's coming up, and we'll explain in our fake news roundup. We got Joe Concha, Rick Grinnell, and later Dr. Sebastian Gorka weigh in on the unprecedented White House leaking and much more.
This is a Fox News alert. I'm Jackie Ibanez in New York. The White House disputing reports that President Trump asked former FBI Director James Comey to end an investigation into ousted National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. The New York Times reports a memo written by Comey claims Trump made the request in February. Lawmakers from both sides weighing in.
A lot of allegations and there's small truths, so why don't we first look at all what's there?
It's an extraordinarily serious development. I mean, if it turns out to be true, if it's an accurate transcription, it looks like the President of the United States directly and personally tried to obstruct a criminal investigation.
And House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz says he wants to get to the bottom of this, tweeting, quote, at GOP oversight is going to get the Comey memo if it exists. I need to see it sooner than later. I have my subpoena pen ready. I'm Jackie Ibanez. Back to Hannity.
Welcome back to Hannity. So more on the story of murdered Democratic National Committee staffer Seth Rich, who was gunned down last July in Washington, D.C. D.C. police are officially in charge of this case, but former D.C. homicide detective Rod Wheeler, who was hired by a third party to investigate the murder on behalf of the family, says Mr. Rich was communicating with WikiLeaks before he was killed. Now, Seth's family has been pushing back today, releasing a statement that reads in part, quote, we are a family who's committed to facts, not fake evidence that surfaces every few months to fill the void and distract law enforcement and the general public from finding. Now, Seth's murderers. Now, the services of the private investigator who spoke to the press was ordered to the Rich family and paid for by a third party and contractually was barred from speaking to the press or anyone outside of law enforcement or the family unless explicitly authorized by the family. Fox News has retained a copy of the contract signed by the Rich family, retaining the services of Rod. He joins us now with the very latest. All right. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the technicality of who hired you. I've known you a long time, Rod. You're a man of honor and integrity. Right. So tell us who hired you.
Well, actually, I was hired by the family, Joel and Mary Rich. They signed the contract. Now, the financial benefit, if there were any financial benefit, and by the way, there wasn't much, that was actually paid for by a third party that I have had very little communication with at all, Sean.
Yeah. All right. Let's go through this case. The timeline is fascinating here. As I played in the last segment, Julian Assange, I asked him repeatedly on radio and television if Russia was involved. Absolutely not. Now, believe him or not, he's a guy that WikiLeaks has an 11-year history of never being proven wrong. And all these leaks, by the way, ended up being, a lot of them ended up being published in places like the New York Times. So I guess my question is, when you look at the timeline of this, And 12 days after he was killed, that shows up on WikiLeaks. What did you discover in terms of the contacts with WikiLeaks?
Right. Well, that's an excellent question. And let me clear that up right now, exactly what it was that I found. Now, I have never seen the emails myself directly. I haven't even seen the computer that Seth Rich used. Here's the problem with all of this. I don't even know where the computer is. I checked with the police department. They said they don't know where the computer is. And the FBI, they say they don't have the computer. Now, where did this information come from in terms of knowing or believing, I should say, that Seth Rich could have been in communications with WikiLeaks? There was a federal investigator that was involved on the inside of the case, a person that's very credible. And I'll tell you, let me just say this, Sean, I don't like to suggest things without saying the person's name, but I can't say the person's name because that person would be thrown under the bus, and I can't do that. But this person, we checked him out. We have to check him out. Very credible. He said he laid eyes on the computer and he laid eyes on the case file. And he came across very credible. When you look at that with the totality of everything else that I found in this case, it's very consistent for a person with my experience to begin to think, well, perhaps there were some email communications between Seth and WikiLeaks. Every time I talk with the police department, though, Sean, every time I talk to the police department about the WikiLeaks or the emails, it's automatically shut down. That discussion is automatically shut down.
Well, so we don't know for sure if the FBI or if the D.C. police have any access to these forensics, these emails? Right.
We don't know. We actually have a statement from the FBI telling us to contact the D.C. police. The D.C. police says contact the FBI. Now, which is it? If this is just a murder investigation, first of all, why would the FBI be involved? The only reason the FBI would be involved, just so that the viewers understand, is if this has some degree of national exposure, meaning because maybe it is related to the DNC, and we don't know that. We don't know that for sure. It could have been a botched robbery. But my point is this, Sean, and I've been investigating murders for a while. You have to look at every possibility. You can't just look at one thing and say, well, that has to be it.
Have you ever seen a lot of robberies, which is how they've been looking into this case, where the person has their wallet and their watch after they've been shot and killed in the back?
No, I haven't. Now, that's not to say that that could not happen. But here's the thing, and this is so important. There's been a $125,000 reward out for information pertaining to the death of Seth Rich. Not one person has come forward. Here's one other thing that's going to be startling, and I'm just going to say this right now. I reached out to the police department way back in March when the family first hired me, right, to get involved. I didn't hear anything from the police department for 2 to 3 days. Guess what I learned yesterday from the family of Seth Rich? The police department did not call me back because someone, a high-ranking official at the DNC, check this out, a high-ranking official at the DNC, when I called the police department, they got that information and called the Rich family wanting to know why was I snooping around.
Wouldn't that explain how is it possible that the DNC, when the FBI wanted to look at their computers, was able to bring in their own people? Or that the people that ended up getting immunity ended up being able to destroy their laptop computers? Is there any evidence that he might have been disgruntled at the treatment of Bernie Sanders and the unfairness, and that the fix was in to put Hillary in that position, and maybe had evidence of that?
No, I haven't seen any evidence in that regard. The only thing that I have been able to confirm is that there were some problems that Seth was having on his job at the DNC right before he was killed. And the person, listen to this, the person that called the father after I called the police to get information, that's the person that Seth was having problems with at the DNC. So, you know, connect the dots here. It's starting to all come together. So, again, let me just really quickly say this. I don't know for sure. I don't know, as a matter of fact, if the emails went out to the WikiLeaks or anybody else, but it sure appears that way.
All right, Rod Wheeler, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. When we come back, our fake news roundup segment of the day, Washington Post newsroom erupting in applause after breaking the so-called big news story yesterday about President Trump sharing information with Russia. So much for unbiased journalists. And also tonight,
After this story broke here last night, we heard yelling behind closed doors here in this West Wing. Robin, this is a White House in chaos right now.
Wow, destroyed Trump media foaming at the mouth over what turned out to be the non-story by the Washington Post. Of course, on top of their two false stories last week, we will expose their hypocrisy. Get reaction from Joe Concha, Rick Grinnell, and also Dr. Sebastian Gorka weighs in on the leaks from the deep state in the White House. Welcome back to Hannity. Time for tonight's fake news media roundup. And last night, the Washington Post reported President Trump gave away classified information during his meeting with the Russians. Well, following the release of that story, the Washington Post, their fact checker, Glenn Kessler, actually tweeted this. Couldn't believe it. Applause in the Washington Post newsroom as the Russia leak scoop breaks the Hollywood access record for the most readers per minute. Now, keep in mind, the same Washington Post newsroom that allegedly broke out in applause when President Obama visited in 2009. Meanwhile, smelling blood in the water, the destroyed Trump propaganda media, they were quick to jump on this speculative report. Take a look.
The White House reeling from another Russia crisis, an unforced error at the hands of President Trump.
The damage to U.S. intelligence interests is being viewed as incalculable this morning.
After this story broke here last night, we heard yelling behind closed doors here in this West Wing. Robin, this is a White House in chaos right now.
If true, this could be the most significant and dangerous mistake of the Trump presidency.
Donald Trump just gave somebody up out there who will end up dead. And that's not hyperbole, by the way. He and other people, whoever that source was inside of ISIS, I guarantee you a lot of people are going to get shot in the head today by ISIS because they're going to indiscriminately start killing people that they suspect leaked this information.
Joining us now with reaction from the Hill, Joe Concha is a media reporter as well as former U.S. spokesman for the UN ambassador, Rick Grinnell. All right, let me start with Rick tonight. So the Washington Post gets all these things wrong last week. You know, they talk about the deputy attorney general and, oh, he was going to step aside, and then he's interviewed. He said, no, anonymous source wrong. And then they get other issues. Well, Comey was asking for money, and no, the interim FBI director says that didn't happen. That's just last week. Then the media takes this credible source and races with the story last night as if with the breathlessness I've never seen before. And the same people that ignored Hillary Clinton and her leaking and classified information on the server and top secret, et cetera.
Look, I think we have two problems here, Sean. One is that the media love leaks. They're encouraging leaks. They're never going to stop talking about these leaks, and they're not going to give us a very good prioritization of who's leaking, why they're leaking. Is this the full information? They're just going to dramatize these leaks. And the second problem that we have is that reporters in Washington, it's all groupthink. They're repeating and retweeting each other. There's very little actual research going on, trying to figure out, is this true? What reporters are racing to do is just tell each other's story and fan the flames. They still haven't accepted the fact that Donald Trump is the president, and I think now they're in the anger phase.
You know, but Joe, there is a certain effectiveness to this. I mean, you know, Saturday Night Live, because of Trump, best ratings ever. Jimmy Kimmel and Fallon were killing Colbert. Colbert has been resurrected from the dead, and his lifeline was sent because of Donald Trump. And, you know, even leftists with their conspiracy theories of doing better than ever on cable news. Is it just because it's big money to just peddle anything, true or not true? Proven wrong twice last week, not proven wrong last week?
Subscriptions are up at the New York Times, subscriptions up at the Washington Post. Everybody has benefited from a Trump presidency because it's unpredictable. It's always something different every day. It's a crisis ever since Trump announced his candidacy over 700 days ago. But I want to go back to a point that Rick just made around anonymous sources. And this is why it's not, I think he's just said, Sean, that it's having an effect. Look at the polling before the Comey firing in mid-April, and then look at it after a week of nonstop negative coverage. Trump's approval rating doesn't move a bit, virtually unchanged. And I think that's because people see every story is based on anonymous sources, and they sit at home and they wonder, well, okay, what is the motive of that anonymous source? Do they want to take down the president in some way? Do they have some sort of hatred, vitriol, and angle there where maybe they want to advance themselves? Maybe it's a matter of access. Are they at a senior level, these sources, or is it the White House chef? And finally, are these credible
Joe,
people?
let me ask you this.
One more point. And finally, the credibility of these folks as well. We don't know who they are and what their history is in terms of telling the truth. So I think people see that at home and they say, you know what, I'm fatigued, I'm getting cold, there's a crisis every day, and I don't know where these reports are coming from.
All right, guys, thank you for your patience. We appreciate you being with us. And up next tonight on this busy news night.
What the president discussed with the foreign minister was wholly appropriate to that conversation and is consistent with the routine sharing of information between the president and any leaders with whom he's engaged.
The National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, earlier today saying President Trump's conversation with the Russian foreign minister was completely appropriate, and he was in the room. Will the Democrats, the Destroy Trump media, will they stop with the hysteria now, the breathlessness? We doubt it. The Deputy Assistant to the President, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, will join us next with reaction.
What the president discussed with the foreign minister was wholly appropriate to that conversation and is consistent with the routine sharing of information between the president and any leaders with whom he's engaged. I'm not concerned at all. That conversation was wholly appropriate to the conversation, and I think wholly appropriate what the expectations are of our intelligence partners. I was in the room. The Secretary of State was in the room, as you know. The Deputy Assistant, the Deputy Advisor for National Security, Dina Powell for Strategy, was in the room, and none of us felt in any way that conversation was inappropriate.
All right, that was National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster earlier today at the White House in the press briefing, saying that what President Trump discussed with the Russian foreign minister last week was completely appropriate. But the destroyed Trump left. They continue to try and take the president down, and these leaks, where are they coming from? They need to stop. Joining us now with reaction, Deputy Assistant to the President, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Current and former officials. Now, it comes from the same newspaper, by the way, that said that the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein threatened to quit, but he did an interview, said, no, I never threatened to quit. And then, of course, they were suggesting that days before Comey left, that James Comey had said he wanted more funding, and McNabb, the interim FBI director, said, no, we have enough funds, we're adequately funded. And the list goes on, and now tonight it's the New York Times. Oh, did Donald Trump ask to end the Flynn probe by a bitter, angry Comey who didn't care a whit about the rule of law and equal justice under the law as it relates to Hillary?
Sean, I think we have to go to the next stage. It's no longer fake news. It's now dishonest news. It's not about a political agenda. It's politics above national security. We've gone through the numbers just since February. Let's look at what has been leaked to the press. I'm just going to give you a handful. The AP leaked the conversation to the President of Mexico. Washington Post leaked the conversation to Australia. Politico leaked the one to Paris, and Reuters one of the calls to the Kremlin. When is it going to stop? When is the conspiracy theory insanity of the resist movement, of the Ben Rhodes, Colin Kahl nexus, going to say, look, we're not going to endanger national security anymore. We're going to do actual journalism.
Sebastian,
it has
Dr.
to
Gorka,
stop.
when is the leaking then going to stop? This has to be coming. Well, either they're making it all up, and by the way, the Washington Post was so wrong so often. The fact that they were breathlessly reporting everything they said last night after last week's disastrous accuracy rating is pretty amazing. And then, of course, the eruption in the Washington Post newsroom. I guess my question is, okay, if they're leaking the Australian conversations with the Australian Prime Minister and people in the Kremlin and elsewhere around the world, that means that's the deep state intelligence community doing it. Has to be coming from there, doesn't it?
Can I just say two things? Number one, the bad news is that there are people that unfortunately we've inherited that don't recognize who the president is and that his primary responsibility is to protect America. And they think they know better, and they think they're allowed to call their friends up at the Washington Post, the Politico, the Huffington Post. That is illegal. That's felonious activity that could endanger not only Americans.
Dr. Gorka, nobody's been held responsible for the felony violation of the Espionage Act with Michael Flynn. Nobody's been held accountable for unmasking, even if it's incidental surveillance, the unmasking, and then the leaking of intelligence. raw intelligence. You know, nobody's been held accountable so far. Nobody's fired. How many Obama holdovers still exist in these communities?
Well, you have to keep doing what you do. Sarah Carter has to keep doing what she does, because you've nailed it. Sean, the biggest story of the last 8 years, not 8 weeks, 8 years, is not just the unmasking and the leak to the Washington Post, but why were those transcripts written? Who wrote the taskers? Because those taskers cannot be justified on the basis of national security. They were clearly politically motivated. When Sarah Carter, when Sean Hannity gets to the bottom of that, we will have a story that makes Watergate look like a fairy tale.
All right, Dr. Gorka, great to see you. As always, when we come back, we need your help. A very important question of the day. We need your input. That's straight ahead.